Welcome, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, good to see everyone.
Oh, my goodness, hello.
Everybody just came at once. It's great to see you all. I hope everyone enjoyed the weather today. It was spectacular.
It was indeed. Hello, everyone. Great to see you.
Nice to see friendly faces.
Evening, everyone.
Hello, Dallin, Jim, Tony, Emily, Sue, Rosie. Does anybody have a computer where you can see more than 25? 25 is my maximum. So I'm scrolling back and forth to see you all.
I see lots of Southern Montgomery folks. It's good to see you all.
Indeed.
And some of our folks here in the north. Great to see you tonight. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Hey, Kurt.
Okay, well, I believe it's time to go ahead and start.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Dana Corsello, and I am the Vicar of Washington National Cathedral, and I serve as Regional Dean for North DC. I'm happy to be the host for tonight's listening session.
Hello, I'm Cricket Park. I serve as the Regional Dean for Southern Montgomery County, and I am the Rector of Redeemer in Bethesda. So I'll be serving as the moderator when we open the floor for questions and comments on the canon.
Wonderful. And at this time, we would ask you to mute yourselves. Keep yourselves muted unless called upon, as this will make it easier for all of our participants to hear what is being said. And I want to point out, you can probably see in the upper left-hand corner, we're recording live. Tonight's session will be posted to YouTube afterwards. In a moment, I will open us in prayer, and then we will hear from a member of the Advisory Committee on Diocesan Stewardship and Parish Vitality, who will introduce the proposed canon. Hopefully, you've all read both the text of the proposed canon and the full report from the Advisory Committee. It might be helpful to have the text of the proposed canon in front of you for tonight's discussion. And we will, of course, post a link to the text in the chat. After the introduction from the Advisory Committee, we will have a few words from Bishop Marianne, and then we will open up the discussion. I will have more guidelines for the discussion, or Cricket will, when we get there. So does anyone have any questions before we get started? If so, will you please type those into the chat? And now I'd like to begin with prayer. And just so you know, we'll pray for Bishop Chilton and her family tonight before we close. Let us pray. Gracious One, we come to you this evening asking for your Spirit to bless us with guidance, wisdom, and grace. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion. Allow us to grow closer as followers of Jesus and nurture the bonds of community within our diocese. Open our hearts and minds that we may know the hope to which you have called us in this work, especially as we make decisions that might affect our sister parishes. And continue to remind us that all we do here tonight, all that we accomplish, is for the building of your kingdom. We ask these things in your name. Amen. And now I'd like to introduce our advisory committee to you. They are Linda Bailey, Allison Hines, and Jonathan Nicholas. And at this time, I will call on Linda Bailey from the Advisory Committee to introduce the first canon. Linda Bailey from the Advisory Committee to introduce the first canon.
So, okay. Peter, I'm hearing feedback. Is that okay? I guess it stopped now. Okay. I don't hear it from me. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Linda Bailey, and I'm a member of Grace Church in Silver Spring. I also have the privilege of serving on the Advisory Committee for Diocesan Stewardship and Parish Vitality, alongside Allison Hines and Jonathan Nicholas, who are the committee representatives from Northern DC. I realize that we may have some new clergy, wardens, and delegates on this call. And so for all of them, as well as a reminder to the rest of us, the Advisory Committee was formed by a resolution passed at Diocesan Convention in January 2020. A copy of that resolution is included with the Advisory Committee's full report, and that can be found on the special convention page of the Diocesan website. If you have not yet read the report from the Advisory Committee, please do so in the next few days. Essentially, though, the resolution asks the Advisory Committee to focus on some very important questions related to our common life in ministry, such as, what are the standards that constitute a viable parish? What are the standards and processes that should apply to parishes which are unable to fulfill their mission and canonical obligations due to financial challenges and secular factors? And what is the role of the diocese in providing support and exercising authority to those parishes that are struggling to fulfill their mission and meet their obligations? The Advisory Committee was formed in the spring of 2020 and met regularly into the fall. There were clergy members and lay members on the committee. Each region of the diocese was represented, and the full diversity of the diocese was represented as well. As a result of our work, the Advisory Committee proposed this new canon that would enable diocesan leaders to proactively work with parishes that are facing significant challenges, with the hope that the diocesan support and guidance might lead a parish to renewed vitality. Right now, unfortunately, parishes often reach out to the diocese when issues and problems have grown so large that it's hard to turn them around, or when they are in need of emergency financial assistance in times of crises. Enabling the diocese to get involved sooner would not only help those parishes, but would benefit the diocese as a whole, saving us all valuable resources and maybe even saving our parishes. It is also common for some leaders in a congregation to reach out to the diocese for help when the leadership is conflicted or unable to resolve its struggles or unable to reach consensus. In proposing this new canon, the Advisory Committee wanted to respect the autonomy of each individual parish while also honoring our shared responsibility and accountability to each other as members of the Diocese of Washington. The committee focused on developing language that was fair, flexible, and effective in addressing situations seen or envisioned in the diocese. The criteria embedded in the proposed canon were developed by reviewing similar canons in other dioceses, through knowledge of our own diocese, and by following the best practices for church governance, mission, and financial sustainability. And throughout the process, the Advisory Committee received input from diocesan leaders, including the Diocesan Council and regional deans. As you read through the proposed canon and reflect upon it, I think there are a few important points to note. The first one is that the Advisory Committee was cautious about granting too much authority to the office of the bishop, and therefore the proposed canon vests the decision-making power to the Diocesan Council, a committee of clergy and lay representatives from each region of the diocese. The bishop's authority is mostly relegated to executing any recommendation by the council. Number two, The advisory committee also felt it was important that parishes, which are the focus of a health and vitality assessment, also be given a voice in the process. And as a result, any clergy or vestry member of a parish undergoing an assessment will have an opportunity to share their views on the parish's health and vitality with the diocesan council. The third point is that the advisory committee considered whether specific metrics should be included in the standards of vitality, or whether the canon should be automatically invoked if the certain number of standards are not met at a parish. For example, should a certain average Sunday attendance be a standard of vitality? Or should it be taken if a parish does not meet 8 of the 12 standards of vitality? In both cases, the advisory committee believed the answer was no. The advisory committee felt that flexibility and process were of primary importance rather than fixed objective criteria, and that any action steps by the diocesan council should be based upon trends within the life of a parish, rather than specific numerical data from one moment in time, because noticeable trends allow for far more effective assessment of a parish's overall health. And the last point is that the advisory committee felt any request for a health and vitality assessment should be made intentionally and thoughtfully. And therefore, while anyone in the parish may request a health and vitality assessment, such requests must be made through the bishop, a member of diocesan council, or a member of the standing committee. Finally, let me say that in doing the work, the advisory committee took into account the revitalization component of the diocesan strategic plan, including the signs of parish vitality, and that the committee considered the proposed canon as a corollary to the revitalization initiative. The purpose of both is the vitality of our parishes and the overall health of our common life and ministry together.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn it over now to Bishop Marianne.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Linda. Thanks to all on the committee, and to you, Dana and Cricket, for your guidance tonight. It's great to see your faces, those of you who I can see. I would simply say that the levers of assistance to congregations in the diocese are completely dependent upon a healthy relationship between the wider diocese and an individual congregation. And so we spend the majority of our time as your diocesan staff trying to ensure that our relationships are strong, that congregations understand that we are here to serve you and to equip you as best as we are able to fulfill the mission that God has entrusted to you, and to do the hardest thing of all, which is to help bridge the gap between the visions that God has entrusted to us and our capacities to live them out. So that's the daily bread, the daily fare of our work with the vast majority of our congregations. In very rare instances, there are significant requirements placed on us as a diocese to be of assistance to distressed congregations, and with virtually no accountability on the congregational side. And that creates an imbalance in the way our relationship unfolds. For example, it is a requirement by canon that every congregation complete an annual audit, right? It's an obligation by canon. And yet we have no enforcement mechanism for that. By and large, that's not a problem. In a few instances, however, it's a real problem. And the lack of that financial stewardship and accountability can come to light long after very serious problems have been brewing or festering in the life of the congregation. And in my time as bishop, these are not abstract situations that I'm telling you about. These are things that have actually happened. And if we had been able to be engaged sooner with some levers of accountability, we might have been able to be of more help to the congregation, one of the hardest things for congregations to acknowledge is when they're having trouble and they don't want to feel judged by their diocesan leadership body. And I totally get that. Every once in a while, that desire not to share what someone once said, our dirty laundry, can lead to avoidances that become very costly toward the end, right? The other kind of common circumstance where a canon like this would be a tool in our toolbox, not the solution for everything, but one of the tools in our toolbox, is when there is a significant unresolvable conflict within the congregational leadership. And what can happen in those situations is that some in that community will reach out to the bishop and ask for assistance or guidance, but without the full permission or invitation of the entire vestry, and the invoking of a very cumbersome process that's made available us through the canons now, there is very little we can do. And so it's kind of the bluntest and most difficult of tools to assist in congregations when they're at that kind of an impasse. And then third and lastly, I would say that in a very rare instances, there are congregations that are just holding on by the very last legs of their life. And they don't want any intervention at all from the diocese, but they are spending down every single resource that they have. And they can go on like that for years. And there is no real way for us to be in meaningful conversation if that is not something that the congregational leaders want. I'm not saying that, I'm not necessarily saying that it's essential for us to have this canon. I'm just giving you some of the examples where, as your bishop, I could see that the existence of this canon might be helpful, even if we don't invoke it, because sometimes just knowing that it's there can motivate a deeper kind of conversation than if it's not there, if that makes sense or not. But I think you know what I mean, that just knowing that that's a possibility is a motivating factor for congregations to engage with us or with others toward greater life in a more proactive way. So I'll stop there. Those are the thoughts that I have, not so much as a champion for the canon, but just giving you my best thoughts as to the circumstances that I and your diocesan staff encounter from time to time when this would be a tool that we currently don't have, that, as far as we can tell, every other diocese in the country does have in one form or another, that might be of service to the greater good of the diocese. So thank you, Dana. That's all I'll say for now.
Okay, Cricket, I'm going to turn it over to you. You need to unmute, Cricket.
I am so cognizant of having two animals in the background that may start barking at any moment. Okay, here we go again. We want to open the floor for questions and comments, and to help structure the discussion, I will first invite questions or comments about the proposed canon overall, and then we'll move through the proposed canon section by section. So if you have a question or comment about a specific clause or a section of the text, please wait till we get to that part of the canon. As moderator, I'll try to balance having a full discussion with questions and answers while also keeping my eye on the time and moving us along through the entire canon. Please know that if we do not get to your question or comment tonight, there will be an opportunity for you to submit your question or comment following this listening session, and Andrew Walter, hi Andrew, your Canon to the Ordinary, will explain the process for doing that before we close this evening. So I believe we have a slide. There we go. During the discussion, please remember to keep yourself on mute until called upon to speak. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment during the discussion, please use the chat feature. For a question, type Q with a colon into the chat and then type your question. If you have a comment, please type C with a colon and then your comment. I'll call on people in the order that questions and comments appear on the chat, and when I do recognize you, please unmute yourself at that time. We ask that you identify your name and congregation before asking your question or making your comment. And for those of us joining by phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand to indicate that you would like to speak, and I will call on you in order. So let's open the floor for overall questions and comments. If you have a question or comment, please type that into the chat and we'll get started. Okay, we have a question from Jim Beardsley. Most dioceses have a canon like this. When was the first canon like this adopted? Can any of the
I mean, I don't know. Are they asking adopted in some other diocese somewhere? Because I don't think one's ever been adopted here, right?
That's right. As far as we know, our diocese has not had a canon like this, at least in the known past. As to when other dioceses adopted the canons, that's not something that we've researched or would be able to answer. But in other dioceses, it is a long-standing canonical provision.
So, Sari, I believe that answered your question as well.
No, not really, actually. Sorry, I'm on dinner duty, and that's why I'm sparing you guys my camera so that you're not seeing me in the kitchen. My question is, has there ever been an attempt in this diocese? Bishop Marianne said that we're the only diocese that we know of who doesn't have a canon like this. And my question is, have we tried in the past? Has there been a reason why we're the only diocese that doesn't have it? You know, what some of the obstacles may have been. I'm just curious about the history of that. Or maybe this is the first time it's ever being proposed. Thanks.
None of us on the committee anyway were familiar with a prior attempt in this diocese to adopt such a canon. It seems to have not been something that, at least in any of our memories, has been proposed in a serious way.
Kurt Gerhardt has a question. In the proposed canon, the ecclesiastical authority has the power to force the resignation of the rector in the vestry. Unlike the Title III dissolution of pastoral relationship, there is no safeguard to protect the rector who may be counting on the compensation to support themselves and their family. How are we assured that this pastoral care will take place if this canon is enacted?
I would say that this canon doesn't replace the other canons that deal with those issues. It simply gives the diocese the authority to kick that process in, to start that process going forward. So there are questions about, whether it's the dismissal of a rector or the even so far as wrapping up the congregation. All of those things have canonical provisions and processes tied to them. This doesn't change any of those.
Thank you, Jonathan. Is there anything?
Can I just add one thing to that? The proposed canon also does not give that authority to the ecclesiastical authority. It gives that power to the diocesan council to make a recommendation as to whether that's the correct course of action. And then the ecclesiastical authority, usually the bishop, has the power to accept that recommendation or not. But the bishop can't unilaterally take that action under this canon without having gone through the process of getting the diocesan council to first make that recommendation.
And that's an important feature of the entire canon, is that the way that it's written is that the council, accepts, reviews the recommendations of the ad hoc committee and presents them to the bishop, who can either accept them or request, further activity. What the bishop, the ecclesiastical authority, cannot do is pick and choose through the recommendations and essentially build, one's own solution. So we were very careful to ensure that the episcopal polity remains in place.
Thank you. I missed a question from James Quigley. So I asked this as a supporter of the canon. My question relates to section 1, purposes. In 2, why is it necessary to include spiritual in regard to the measurement of the relative health of a parish? Same question in regards to port 4, A and B. Is this something that the committee members would like to take on now, or should we wait until we get to this parts?
I'm sorry, so the question is why is a component of spirituality included?
Yes.
I remember we talked about that a lot. I think I certainly was intentional. I don't know, Jonathan, do you remember more than I do?
Well, I think it folds into the issue that the purpose of the canon is to be, and of any kind of assessment or review, is to be holistic in nature. We're not talking about financial audits. We're not talking about counting noses. We're talking about trying to assess the overall health of a parish. And certainly the spiritual component of a community is vital if it's part of the body of Christ.
Actually, I'm now remembering too, I think the sense was too that if all these other factors had some serious deficiencies, is it likely that this would still be a vibrant spiritual congregation or community on its own? I mean, perhaps all those things are somewhat interconnected.
And this is Allison, and yes, I second both your comments. That is exactly what the discussion was. We sort of really wanted to make sure that we were looking at a parish in its entirety. And certainly we can't talk about a parish that has vitality if the spirituality is not there. So it really was to ensure that we are looking at each and every component, and that no one component really outweighs the others. It's really about trying to look at the whole. So yes.
Are there any other general questions? Here comes one. From Robert Hart. Linda Bailey indicated that the advisory committee did not want to give ecclesiastical authority ultimate authority, yet section 5407A in general states that ecclesiastical authority has the power to approve or disapprove any or all recommendations. Doesn't that give the bishop ultimate authority?
Yes.
Well, yes and no, in that it requires the bishop to obviously engage, but again, it's kind of odd with the bishop staring at me as I say this, but what the bishop cannot do is write her own script.
Correct.
If I may, since the bishop is being invoked here, what I understand from other dioceses, and in particular, I'm very close to the Diocese of Arizona at the moment because I serve as coach for the new bishop there, In the Diocese of Arizona, the bishop has complete and unilateral authority. It is written into the canons that she can engage and disband a vestry. She can dismiss within the canons a rector. All of the authority is invested in the bishop. Now that's one extreme. My understanding is that this body, and I'll let the task force speak for itself, but you looked at other dioceses where the authority was more distributed. And it seems like this is a distributed authority model in that it requires significant conversation and engagement, investigation independent from the bishop's office, so that the bishop, whoever the bishop may be, can't stack the investigation according to preconceived assumptions. And that, but in the end, you're absolutely right. In the end, the bishop has both the authority according to this particular version, and I think other dioceses that you modeled it from, to either accept or to modify the recommendations. And I think that goes back to Kurt Gerhardt's concern about pastoral considerations. There is a particular authority given to the bishop in most of the canons to engage on a pastoral basis. And so it would be in that vein where a bishop would exercise that authority.
We also, the advisory committee spent a lot of time talking about who should be involved in this assessment. Right. And I feel like we really, really made sure that no one that really wanted to have a voice in that would be excluded. So that's why there's a part about if anybody from the vestry or leadership of the church can have input into the deliberations and the workings of the assessment group. So there was a lot of concern that people not feel shut out of this process. And I think there's a lot of mechanisms and ways for them into the process. And that is, I think, hopefully that would keep it from falling into the hands of just a few people with some agenda.
Cricket, if I may, this is obviously a highly advanced group. They've all read the canon. I wonder if you might just start moving us through the body of the text, because most of the questions are referring to particular texts, and it might be helpful for all of us to see it as we're going through.
I was going to do that. We're on the same page.
Right.
So there is from Alan, there is a comment that says about vitality and viability. Alan, if you can kind of hold on to that, let's go through the rest of these things and we'll come back, if that's okay. So we've discussed the canon overall, and so we will focus now on specific sections of the canon, starting with sections 5401, 5402, and 5403. These sections cover definitions, application to parishes, and the initiation of the canon. So please read this and let me know in the chat if there are any questions or comments on these three sections. Any questions? Not seeing anything in the chat or elsewhere. Oh, one new message. Could a rector or parish initiate an assessment in the sense that it should bring a helpful process? Is that correct, Jeffrey? Jeffrey Hoare? That it could be a helpful process. So let me do that again. Could a rector or parish initiate an assessment in the sense that it could be a helpful process?
Absolutely. And of course, the whole underlying objective of of the canon is that it be helpful for individual parishes. And the way to initiate that, is the channel is very wide. You can talk to the bishop, you can talk to any one of 20 some members of the standing committee, any one of 20 some members of the council to get things going.
Anyone else? If there are no other questions. Okay, Jeffrey also says, so let's add number 4 under B. I'm not quite sure what that means. Jeffrey, could you explain, please?
What I'm saying is let's be clear that parishes and rectors can invite this process. I realize that the fact that we're even having this discussion is that parishes that don't ask for help ought to. But I think that if we can find some ways to keep reflecting the autonomy and responsibility of parishes in this process, we would strengthen the canon.
Thank you. I will basically say that the members of the committee are taking notes, and this will be provided to them as they do the rest of their work after this is completed. So let's now focus on section 5404. This includes the 12 standards of vitality that are considerations for an assessment. Please take some time to look at this, and then also you can begin posting questions and comments to the chat. Did that help, Leslie? Leslie, thanks. Okay. What questions do you have with regard to this section? Stephanie Gray asks, how is the committee formed?
So actually, I think if we look at the next one under 5405, it says that the council approves the request. Council shall appoint a committee on assessment of health and vitality. And then I think it talks about membership. So I don't know if do we want to go to that now, Cricket, or I think it talks about that under the next section.
Okay, let's wait then. Instead of bouncing back and forth, that might be.
Yeah, it talks about it pretty extensively on the next page.
Okay, thank you. James Quigley asked, it has a comment, there is nothing in this section regarding a measurement for spiritual vitality. Jonathan or Allison? Yeah. Linda has left the building.
Yeah, I'm right back. Sorry.
Well, I think that's highly subjective, and so that's why it's mentioned as something to be assessed, but it's very difficult to obviously very difficult to quantify in any way, but it's something that simply should be taken into account to the extent that it can be.
Jim Beardsley asks, how is church attendance calculated? In person, online?
Great question.
I think that one of the principles that the advisory committee followed in developing this canon was not to try to wade too far outside of the area that we were asked to examine. And I think that that's a broader question in terms of measuring attendance that goes beyond the specifics of this canon. So ultimately, I think whatever standard the church decides on for that would apply to this canon as well as in other places.
And just to follow on that, one of the things that we did that we avoided doing was trying to set or carve into stone church policies in this canon. You'll find that again and again we use fairly vague language, and that's because those policies, those measures, those standards are going to evolve over time.
I think too, there was, I think we were more concerned when we talk about trends, whatever as however you're doing ASA, that you do it consistently. So you're not adjusting it, to try and have it appear one way or the other. Same thing with online. I don't know how parishes are dealing with that, but I think as long as the consistent policy is set, then you can see patterns and you can see trends.
It certainly made for an interesting parochial report, I can tell you that. Comment from Heidi that item 8 seems to relate to spirituality. And a comment from James, the subjectivity of spiritual health, why I wonder about it being included above. Is there an item 8?
Yeah, I don't. Actually, it looks like there's. Oh, I see it. It's maintains faith formation programs and outreach programs. So it says 8. Says it's onto the side. It says maintains faith formation programs and outreach programs. So I think that's what he's talking about.
Ah, okay. James says, I promise I will stop now. We're very glad that we have your comments. Thank you. Robert Hartman, how about provides confirmations, etc., instead of maintains the appropriate number of? This gets away from the idea of there being an ideal metric.
That's good.
I'll commend that to the committee members. And yes, the reason we couldn't find 8 is because it's on the same line as 7. So
right, it just needed to be indented.
What else? Anything? All right. And I'm not seeing any other activity. Are we ready to move on? Okay. So now we'll look at section 5405 for the process of conducting a health assessment. Is that correct? Or am I repeating myself?
Yeah, 5405. And this was the question that Stephanie raised about how is the committee put together.
Okay, if we could just take a minute to review that. If you have a copy of this in front of you and you'd like to go ahead and type in a question, please do. From Rosie, Section 5405D gives the committee authority to submit questions to any member of that parish. Yet Section 5406B does not seem to provide such members an opportunity to comment on the report. Why would members whose input is solicited be excluded from commenting on the report?
That's a good question.
Members?
I think when the report is, having a little trouble coordinating everything here, but I'm quite sure that there is a stipulation that when the report is submitted to the council, that members of the parish have the right to be present and comment on it. Though perhaps the chancellor will correct me on that.
I think the question points out that the way we have drafted it is that only the vestry members have the canonical right to comment on it under this proposal in 5406B. So I think that's a good question that we can take back to the full committee. I do think that's worth giving some further thought to.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add again that the intent of the group over and over again was broad as possible. I mean, it isn't. Maybe you found where there's a glitch, but it's not okay. We're going to exclude. I mean, we really wanted people who had an investment, who were stakeholders, to be involved in the process to the extent that was reasonable as they could be. So it's not an intent to exclude anybody at all.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Anything else?
Okay, Stephanie, did that answer your question?
I'm sorry, Cricket. I'm on my phone and I just can't figure out how to type in the chat box. Can I just ask a question? I can't even see myself right now.
Sure. Go ahead.
He's muted. You're muted.
You're muted, Sari.
Yeah, sorry. I'm so sorry. That was frustrating. I was like, how do I type it? Okay. I was a part of a church in Los Angeles where the vestry was actually stacked. And what happened is the congregation felt very differently about what the vestry was doing in regards to the rector. So the vestry wanted to push the rector out. And the congregation really, many members of the congregation felt differently about it. And under this scenario, you would have a vestry that all has the ability to comment, but other like assuming that the vestry is not representative of the congregation, you would need some other mechanism where congregants can also have an opportunity to comment. I just wanted to throw that out from an experience that we had that was messy.
Thank you. Next. John Harmon asks, what process is being considered to ensure that the committee is diverse?
Well, I think that falls to the responsibility of the council. Again, we didn't want to tie anyone's hands too tightly, but you can see that there's a requirement for certain, representation from certain committees and from the parish.
I think it's a good point to help us avoid doing an implicit bias. And so, I don't know, maybe it's worth noting that, to make sure that we keep that front and center, or you can lapse into implicit biases.
The answer to your question, John, is yes.
Yes.
So Jeffrey Hoare has a comment in the chat that it is good for the whole church that there be a mechanism to intervene over the wishes of rector and vestry in some situations. This might be the best we can do. I take the bishop's point that the existence of the canon can change the terrain. I still wonder about how to prevent mischief by some future bishop. We've seen in Fort Worth, South Carolina, and elsewhere that checks and balances don't really work. Might we consider some mechanism for a rector parish to appeal a decision to assess? I expect the committee has thought about this and don't need to take time on this Zoom call, but remain concerned about centralizing power when it can be used both for good and for bad. May I just kind of remand that off to the committee for, okay. John Harmon asks, are there any African-American clergy currently on the advisory committee?
Yes. Yes.
Patty Alexander has a comment under D3, authority of the committee. The canon gives authority to access any correspondence or email. Given the often confidential nature of pastoral work, this seems problematic. Perhaps the language should be qualified to indicate relevant correspondence or email.
Again, that would certainly be the intent. I mean, you know, that I think we would expect the group would only be interested in what was germane to the assessment, but maybe that's one to make a note of.
Thank you, Patty. Anything else? I think it would be helpful to clarify in order to engender trust. It's an addition to Patty's comment.
I'd like to say something in response to the concern about the bishop's authority over against the congregation or the rector. And simply to say that in the majority of cases where the congregation is on what would be in the unstuck church's schema of life support, a church that is really in the last phases of congregational life, and that continuing on in the same way without some intervention is a pretty good indicator of where the trend of decline will go. There is no rector, right? These are congregations that don't have rectors. And so they are typically being served, and I'm speaking of our diocese now very specifically, they are being served by retired clergy or intermittent clergy, and the power really, so I just wanted to clarify that there are some instances where there is perhaps a really good power struggle between bishops and rectors, but the instances where this canon would be a tool, I would say the vast majority can no longer afford clergy leadership, right? And again, the only distinction being is if there is a congregation in significant conflict. So I guess I just wanted to say that because the scenario of a rector being besieged by the bishop is not one that it's like taking the most extreme case of possibilities, but the reality is that the canon would serve congregations in a very different context.
Gail Epps has a question. Shouldn't the lay and clerical members of the committee be the same? 5405B1.
I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah,
I think that what we have said and what the draft says is that they'll be approximately the same. But when the committee discussed this, we didn't think we wanted to tie things so closely that there always had to be exactly the same number of clerical members and lay members. We wanted the goal to be that there was adequate representation from both the clergy and the laity, but there could be circumstances where, for example, it made sense to have 3 lay people and 2 clergy members, as opposed to having to necessarily always have either 2 and 2 or 3 and 3.
Does that answer your question, Gail? Thank you. Anything else, or we can move on? Okay, we'll now focus on sections 5406 and 5407. These sections deal with what happens after the Diocesan Council receives a health assessment on a parish and includes the parish's opportunity to respond to the assessment, council's recommendation for any action, and then the bishop's response to council's recommendations. Please type in any questions or comments on 5406 or 5407. We have a question from Alan Johnson. This canon gives the office of the bishop, the standing committee, or any member of the council broad and sweeping powers to start an assessment. Any 2 issues, parish vitality or viability, could trigger an assessment. If vitality and spirituality is highly subjective, how will a committee assess a parish vitality or spiritual health? Again, it seems like 2 separate issues.
I would clarify that neither the bishop nor any member of the standing committee or any member of the council has the ability to initiate an assessment. They only have the ability to propose an assessment, and that it is the council that actually considers that recommendation and if it deems it necessary, appoints a committee.
Does that answer the question, Ellen? Other questions? Anything else, or we'll move on? Okay, finally we get to sections 3, 4, 5, and 6, which deal with the amendments to the canons that we would need to make if the proposed canon is adopted, and includes the effective date for the proposed canon.
And so just as a clarification on these sections, these are really all technical amendments that in trying to adopt a new canon, we need to make sure it fits in with the existing canons, and that's what sections 3 and 4 are about. The effective date, we would actually, when this is actually proposed in April, the effective date would be April 18th, 2021 as the proposed effective date. The idea would be to ask the special convention to adopt this canon and for it to become effective immediately.
Thank you, John. Any questions about these sections? So these, I believe we are at the point where we've had a chance to ask questions about everything. And I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to talk about our timeline. Thank you all.
Thanks, Cricket. Hi, everyone. Andrew Walter here, Canon to the Ordinary and the staff liaison to the advisory committee. Thank you so much for these questions and comments. This has been really, really helpful. And I've been taking notes. I think members of the advisory committee have as well. After tonight, as you reflect on this conversation, if you have additional questions or comments, please do send those to me. I will be collecting everything that comes in and sharing that with the advisory committee. So yes, as Cricket said, I just want to walk through the timeline where we go from here. We are in the midst of these listening sessions, which we're holding all around the diocese. The final one will take place on Thursday, March 25th. And then we're asking if you do have any additional questions or comments based on tonight's conversation, based upon your reading of the advisory committee's full report or the canon, to please email those to me by Wednesday, March 31st. And that's because the advisory committee will be meeting on Tuesday, April 6th, and we will be sort of digesting and processing all of the feedback that the committee is receiving to determine whether or not to tweak or edit, amend the proposed canon ahead of diocesan convention. I mean, the special convention. And based on tonight's feedback, I would expect that the advisory committee will make some changes to the proposed canon. If that happens, the canons committee will then meet on Thursday, April 8th to take the changes that the advisory committee recommends and to put those changes into the proper canonical language. And after the canons committee meets, a final draft of the proposed canon will be published on Monday, April 12th, which is the Monday just prior to the special convention. We will then open a window for receiving written amendments to the proposed canon. And that window is Monday, April 12th to Thursday, April 15th. If you want to propose an amendment to the canon, but don't have a chance to submit it during that window, don't worry, because we will be able to accept amendments during the special convention itself. And the convention, as you can see, takes place on Saturday, April 17th. I think that's it from me, but I would, if anyone has any questions about that, I'd certainly be willing to answer those. The whole purpose of these listening sessions and the opportunity for leaders like you around the diocese to provide feedback is to help facilitate the discussion, the debate, and vote on the proposed canon at the special convention on the 17th. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for participating in this important listening session.
Sari has one final question.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, hey, Sari.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you. This might be a sensitive question, but I'm curious, once this, sorry, someone said my name and obviously your phone just responded. So I wanted to know if once this is passed, if it passes and it is, it's a go. Are there already cases in our diocese that are expected to come up immediately? Like, have there been requests for this type of canon where as soon as this is in motion, we're going to hit the ground running and there's going to be investigations happening and stuff? I just wanted to know, is this just planning for the future, or are there actually currently cases that you're expecting this to be put in motion immediately?
I don't think so. And I see Bishop Marianne shaking her head no as well.
That's really helpful. I know if this comes up at all in your maybe opening comments, or Marianne, because I feel that one of the questions in the back of my mind has been, is there some situation happening right now that is in the subtext of this, in the background, where like we're trying to get this to pass so that you can address a particular situation? And so that's actually really helpful and transparent. Thank you.
There is one other question. Ellen Johnson Taylor asks, could someone clarify the issues of viability and vitality as outlined in this canon? There's someone on the committee who could address that, please.
I think that refers to the standards established in one of the earlier sections that gives a variety of criteria. In general, vitality would refer to the energy and spirit of the church, and viability would largely refer to its more quantifiable measures of health. But that's why there are, I think, a dozen different measures of those things that all together combined give you a picture of its vitality and viability.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Just real quick, I think it would be easier for me to talk it out rather than trying to navigate my screen and so on. It seems like there are two separate issues. The vitality of a church and its viability are two separate issues. And when they're conflated into one, since any one of those two could trigger an assessment, then it would be helpful to clarify what we mean by viability. A parish may be viable in that they have the resources to go on for indefinitely. But when you start using some of the language that is in there, the vitality may not be there, and that will trigger the assessment. Good intentions aside, quite often we pass or we invoke or we establish policies that have deleterious effect. And so it's not the intention. And I'm careful to refer to the office of the bishop because this has a long-standing effect down the road. And so while the intention of the bishop, current bishop, may be one, we don't know what the intent or the read of future bishops may be. So it would be nice and helpful to let's not move on the assumption that best intentions are, but hammer it out in a way so we have clarity of what we're talking about. And I have some concerns because the language there says the bishop, standing committee, or any member of council could start. Well, the assumption would be that nobody's going to start a frivolous assessment. So if somebody asks for an assessment, is with cause. And so that has given me pause to look at this and say, some work needs to be done. I think, and I'm not going to put words in Sariq's mouth, but it seems like we're trying to get at something in a roundabout way. And so it would be helpful so that clergy, vestry, and all of us involved have a clear understanding of where those lines are and when we're coming up to that line. Thank you.
The department is agreeing with you, Alan. Perhaps this is one of those things where you and anyone else who is having similar concerns could write to Andrew about maybe some specific language that would help the committee move forward. I think it might be easier for the committee to work with something that's on paper. Mm-hmm. Is that okay?
Yeah, and just one last point, and then I'm going to stop. But as we implement this canon, or if it's implemented, how is it reconciled to the other canons? I think Kurt referred to Title III. And so how are these reconciled to the others? Is it going to supersede? Is it complementary? And so it'd be helpful that a very thoughtful process, we engage in a very thoughtful process to make sure at the end we're not going, oh, it was our intent and there are unintended consequences along the way. Thank you.
I think that's one of the things what John was speaking to with regard to making sure this canon fits with the other canons.
That's right. And this canon doesn't supersede other canons, and in particular doesn't supersede the canons of the Episcopal Church as a whole. And so all of the actions that are taken pursuant to this canon need to fit within the framework of what is permitted by the canons of the Episcopal Church, which includes the Title III provisions that were talked about before.
And we have another, if an assessment is deemed necessary by the diocese, is the intent to make it transparent to the entire parish, or is it to be limited to parish leadership? It could have a direct bearing on the vitality or viability of that parish. Someone want to respond to that?
So I'm sorry, is the question, would the parish know this was going on, or is it just confined with the leadership of the church?
Yes, it's hard to do that on the fly when I'm typing it. So yeah, my question is, if it's deemed and it's either a shock or a surprise to the parish leadership, is it the intent of this canon to make it transparent to everybody in the parish that an assessment is happening, or is it intended to be kept, within the confines of the parish leadership and the diocese?
I'd be happy to defer to someone else. I guess, again, the kinds of scenarios that we talked about, I think it would be really obvious that there were some sort of issues, and if no one in the parish knew about them, that would probably be an issue. So again, the types of churches we were talking about where the pension payments aren't being paid, or there's really, really severe types of problems, or clergy aren't being paid. I guess I just I think it's really important to think things through to their logical conclusion, but it just and I really appreciate what someone said about we know what we intend today, but what does that mean 5 years from now? It's really intended to try and provide support and aid for parishes that are in need support of aid. It's not, I don't ever remember talking about going after parishes that were doing fine, that and again, we didn't define what doing fine was. We didn't say it's 50 people a week or it's 500 people a week. So I would hope it would be transparent. I mean, if this were going on without a parish knowing about it, I would think that would be part of the problem. But I don't know.
And the canon, specifically empowers the committee to basically talk to whoever they want to. So word's going to get out pretty fast, I would think.
And it should.
I think that's worth. I mean, again, that's worth noting to the committee to make some. It seems like there's some real energy around transparency that can be incorporated. I just would encourage everyone to go back to the body of the text that has all of the definitions of a functioning parish by canon. It's all right there. I mean, it's basically the obligations of a congregation. And I think the point that I hear, which is a really powerful one and one worthwhile taking, is that vitality, although we have now 7 signs of parish vitality that we have adopted that are different from the canonical ones. So I would say, look at the 7 vital signs and then look at that list of the canonical responsibilities of a congregation. We have, I would guess, I'm guessing now 6 or 7 congregations who are not able right now to fulfill the vast majority of those parish obligations. But we have no mechanism in our canons for them to be anything other than full parishes with full diocesan authority. That means they get votes at diocesan convention. That means that they get votes on diocesan budgets. They can vote for the bishop. They have all the authority and privileges of congregations, and yet they are not able to meet the basic obligations as listed in the canons, which includes paying all of the things that you saw there. And so whether or not that matters to whether this is what that would be enough to say it's about viability and not vitality, that might be a helpful way for the committee to think about this. But it is really a question of, can the parishes fulfill their obligations as parishes? And right now, there is no canonical intervention mechanism. We don't have a canon to reduce. We don't have any mission status congregations. We have no authority whatsoever. It's not the end of the world for us not to have this authority, by the way. We functioned fine without it. We can continue on. But it is in terms of the resources that are invested in those congregations in a time of their life when they are least able to benefit from that intervention. The cost to the overall diocese is very high. And I think that that was what the people who put this committee together were trying to say to all of us, is that the cost is very high. It's not particular, I mean, it's high on the bishop and her staff. That's not the biggest issue here. The issue is the overall cost to the diocese. When a congregation is no longer able to function as a congregation, and yet is able to continue on and limp along and require all the privileges of a congregation without being able to fulfill any of the obligations, and sometimes creating significant liabilities for the rest of the diocese to shoulder. For example, unpaid pension payments, just as one example. The example of property that is left in complete disrepair, and there is no other mechanism except for the diocese to intervene in a case of emergency. Do you hear what I'm saying? It's that kind of reality. Now, if that would be helpful to just focus on that, maybe that's feedback that you might want us to take back to the committee. But it's the issue of stewardship of the wider diocese in conversation with what's best for a particular congregation. And it's really hard. I'm so glad you guys are taking this as seriously as you are, because it's the first time that this diocese will vote on a transfer of authority from congregations to the diocese. And it's pretty rare that any body willfully gives up authority, right? So I have said from the very beginning, the likelihood of this passing is low because of the intensity of the anxieties of what that will mean. And so we have to be really clear if this is the way we want to organize ourselves with the congregations who are in fact in greatest need of our best thinking and our best offerings. And I hear you loud and clear, Alan and others, that the worst thing that can happen is when best intentions are then the cause of something that we didn't intend. So we have every responsibility to be as careful with our language as possible. So I'm so grateful to all of you. And I think the committee has a lot of work to do to see if we can hear something that will ease the anxieties, the legitimate concerns of so many, as we look forward to what a vital diocese would be like. So
we have another comment from John that says it might be helpful to see a provision that might encourage the diocese to reach out to a congregation that might be at the threshold of becoming a thriving community with a little assistance from the diocese.
Well, that's the strategic plan, friends. I mean, that's everything. Everything about the strategic plan is to do exactly that. And this canon had nothing. I mean, the canon was not part of the strategic plan, but that's the focus of your diocese in every conceivable way. So, John, you said you wanted to make a comment. Go for it.
Thank you, Bishop. I was reflecting on the comments from Alan as well, and also looking at the issue of vitality and to begin to see if there's a way in which there could be a provision where often congregations can get stuck from moving from being mediocre to thriving, and to begin to look at places where we can partner with congregations rather than when the downward spiral is taking place. That is not a very, it's a difficult place to enter a congregation at that time. So is there a way for this canon to begin to invite a congregation when they're doing well and comfortable to say, look, we think you can do better. Is there a way that we can partner with you to, at this tipping point, to move you forward? that's what I'm thinking. So at least there's some balance. So this kind of doesn't have a negative burden, rather it has some positive twist to it. So what the diocese is also interested in churches, the congregations that are doing well, but could do better. And this is an instrument that could be used. I don't know if that's a possibility here.
That's what I've dedicated my entire episcopate to, John, and everything about the work that we're doing. So I couldn't agree more. If there were a way for that to be communicated in the canon, that it's meant to be for vitality and health, I think that would be extraordinary.
And it certainly was
Thank you.
the most sincere hope of the committee, is that
Sure.
rather than waiting till, you're having a fire sale, that some group can enter in and, provide some strategies and some help and support that does turn it. That is really what the hope is that, before there's nothing that can be done, a group could enter in and at least see if there's something else to do. I just real quickly kept thinking about the thing about emails, and I realized how that reads, that we need to see. And I remember that discussion. It was more about a parish who's really struggling and really doesn't want to share anything. They don't want to share their books. They don't want to, they may not even be in a place where they can put together, financial records. And so I think that's just a great thing to think about is, if it reads like we want to look at, no, it's more for provide some ability to say, if we're going to help, if we're going to walk through this together, we have to be able to see, documents or conversations that are important to the problem. But I see your point about it can look like we want to rummage through your emails. No, we want to give someone the power to see the documents that are essential to doing the work. So, but that's something for us to think about, I guess.
Because usually the parishes that are facing a crisis are the ones that haven't been doing their audits, haven't been submitting their reports, the ones that we know the least about, except that something's happened.
Right. Or they're asking for money. They're coming to the diocese and asking for money. But that's a good point. We need to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
What all of these listening sessions are for. So,
Yeah.
thanks, everyone.
Okay, are we ready to wrap it up? You guys had a long enough day. Thank you, everyone, for hanging in there with us tonight. Thank you. And remember, Andrew will be available via email, phone for further questions and comments. Let us pray. Thank you. Thank you, Creator God, for accompanying us on this journey. Our trust and hope abides in you. We need your help every day. And we thank you for the assurance that even hard things are possible. And we give thanks for Bishop Marianne, Canon Walter, the advisory committee, and everyone who cares deeply for this ministry of the diocese. Bless us with rest tonight and a good night's sleep. Forgive us for things we did today that did not honor you. Take care of our families, especially Bishop Chilton and her grief. Please take care of her family. And keep us all safe this night. May your angels guard us and watch over us, and may tomorrow be bright. Amen.
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 Right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Night, everyone. Thank you.
Blessings to you.